In the heart of the Colorado Rockies, nestled among whispering pines and rugged cliffs, stood a modest log cabin that I, Daniel Harper, called my sanctuary. At 54, I'd spent decades as an architect, designing sleek city buildings that pierced the sky. But this cabin, just outside the quaint resort community of Pinewood Estates near Denver, was my escape from the urban grind. Its wraparound porch and weathered cedar walls were a canvas for my soul, a place where I could sketch designs in peace, sip coffee, and listen to the wind. I'd poured years of savings into this retreat, transforming its interior into a warm haven of polished wood and soft leather, every detail curated to reflect my love for harmony and balance. It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and the air carried the crisp promise of winter. Inspired by the season, I decided to hang amber Christmas lights along my porch. I'd always been meticulous, so I checked Pinewood Estates' HOA guidelines first. The rules called for tasteful decorations in keeping with the community's natural aesthetic. Amber, with its soft, golden glow, seemed perfect, complementing the cabin's wood tones and casting a cozy warmth against the twilight. I stepped back to admire my work, satisfied with the understated elegance. But peace, as I'd soon learn, was fragile. I was brewing coffee when I heard voices outside, sharp, insistent, cutting through the morning calm. Peering through the window, I saw a woman charging up my driveway like a general on a mission, her bright floral dress clashing with the muted forest around her. Her dark hair, teased into a gravity-defying helmet, bobbed with each step. Behind her trailed a security guard I recognized as Tom, a lanky guy I'd swapped small talk with at the community gate. The woman's voice hit me before I even opened the door. "Excuse me," she barked, pointing at my lights with a manicured finger. "I'm Margaret Collins, president of the Pinewood Estates HOA, and those lights are a blatant violation of our standards. Take them down. Now." I stepped onto the porch, confused but calm. "I'm sorry, what's the issue?" I checked the guidelines, and these lights are tasteful. They match the cabin perfectly. Margaret's face twisted, her lipstick-red mouth curling into a sneer. "Tasteful? Those garish things are an eyesore. Our community has a reputation to uphold, and your tacky decorations are dragging us down." She gestured wildly, her hair swaying like a storm cloud. Tom shuffled behind her, avoiding my gaze, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. I explained my reasoning, how the amber hue enhanced the natural aesthetic, how I'd chosen them with care. As an architect, I knew design, and I wasn't just throwing up random decor. But Margaret wasn't listening. She cut me off, waving her hands. "I don't care about your theories. Those lights are coming down, or you'll face consequences." Tom finally spoke, his voice low. "Ma'am, this is his property. I can't force him to leave his own home." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Then explain the consequences, Tom." She turned to me, her voice shrill. "You're banned from the clubhouse until those lights are gone. And if they're not down by tomorrow, expect fines and further action." With that, she spun on her heel and stormed off, her floral dress a blur of color against the pines. Tom lingered, apologetic. "Look, Daniel, she's been on a power trip lately. I'd take the lights down for now. Pick your battles." I stood there, stunned. I'd paid my HOA fees on time, kept my property pristine, and now I was being treated like a vandal over a string of lights. The unfairness burned in my chest, and I found myself tapping my fingers on the porch railing, a nervous habit from years of drafting under pressure. That night, as the amber lights glowed softly outside, I made a decision. I wasn't going to roll over. I'd built my career on precision and persistence, and I'd be damned if I let Margaret Collins bully me out of my own home. I pulled out my laptop and dove into the HOA bylaws, every page of fine print and legalese. What I found kept me up until 3 a.m., my coffee long cold. The clubhouse, Margaret's pride and joy, was a house of cards operating without proper permits, with financial records that didn't add up and violations that could make a city inspector wince. The more I read, the more I realized this wasn't just about lights. Margaret was hiding something, and I was going to find out what. The next morning, I headed to Sarah's coffee shop in the community square. Sarah Miller, a 60-year-old widow who'd opened the shop after retiring from teaching, was my closest ally in Pinewood. Her place smelled of fresh scones and second chances, and she'd had her clashes with Margaret over a non-compliant shop sign. "Daniel," she called, her gray curls bouncing as she waved me over. Heard about your light drama. Margaret's lost it this time. I spread my findings across a table printouts of bylaws, permits, and financial discrepancies. Sarah, look at this. The clubhouse isn't licensed for the events they host, and these expense reports? No receipts for the improvements Margaret's been charging us for. Sarah's eyes widened, her fingers twisting a napkin. Good Lord, Daniel. She's been fleecing us. That afternoon, I decided to attend the monthly HOA meeting held in the clubhouse Margaret's personal throne room. Usually, only a handful of the 50 residents showed up, but I walked in with a folder of evidence and a fire in my gut. Margaret sat at the head of the table, her floral dress now a garish mix of pink and green. Well, she said, her voice syrupy with venom. Mr. Harper, here to apologize for those hideous lights? I smiled, taking a seat. I'm here to discuss the clubhouse's operations. The room grew quiet. John Mitchell, a 62-year-old retired contractor on the HOA board, leaned forward, his weathered face curious. Margaret's smile faltered. Everything is above board, she snapped. I don't know what you're implying. I laid out my documents. Then you can explain why the clubhouse is hosting paid events without a business license, or why we've collected $20,000 in fees this year with no record of where it went. John stroked his chin, nodding slowly. That's a valid concern. I hadn't thought about the legal side. Margaret's face reddened, clashing with her dress. Those events fund our community. You're just causing trouble. But the other residents were whispering, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. Margaret ended the meeting abruptly, but as we filed out, she cornered me. You think you're clever, she hissed. But you're messing with the wrong person. 2 days later, an email from Margaret hit every resident's inbox, titled Community Alert, addressing disruptive behavior. It painted me as a troublemaker bent on destroying Pinewood's harmony, proposing a fee hike to cover administrative costs from my frivolous complaints. I sat in my cabin, banned from the clubhouse and now the community villain, when I found something in an old filing cabinet land survey from the cabin's previous owners. What it revealed made my heart race. My property wasn't just a cabin. It was the key to the entire community's water supply, including the line feeding Margaret's precious clubhouse. The discovery of the old land survey was like finding a hidden ace in a high-stakes poker game. As I sat in my cabin, the amber Christmas lights casting a warm glow through the windows, I pored over the faded document. The survey, dated from when Pinewood Estates was first developed in the 1970s, showed my modest plot as more than just a scenic retreat. It was designated a utility hub parcel, controlling water and utility rights for a significant chunk of the community, including the main water line that fed the clubhouse. In my 54 years, I'd learned to trust my instincts, and right now, they were screaming that this was the leverage I needed to turn the tables on Margaret Collins. I'd spent my career as an architect reading blueprints and navigating complex building codes, so I approached the survey with the same precision. The water line running through my property was the community's lifeline, and the clubhouse, Margaret's crown jewel, depended on it entirely. If I wanted to, I could legally disrupt their supply, not that I'd do something so drastic without cause, but the possibility alone was a game changer. I spent the next few days diving into property law, water rights, and utility easements, my dining table covered in legal books and notes. It felt like I was back in grad school, but with higher stakes. To confirm my findings, I called my old friend Robert, a 58-year-old property lawyer who'd helped me navigate zoning issues for clients in the past. Over coffee at a diner outside Pinewood, I laid out the survey and my research. Robert listened quietly, his sharp eyes scanning the documents. When I finished, he leaned back and let out a low whistle. Daniel, you're sitting on a gold mine. This isn't just about Christmas lights anymore. You've got the HOA by the throat. He explained that my utility hub status gave me significant legal rights. The HOA couldn't operate the clubhouse without my cooperation, and any attempt to force me out, like Margaret's recent email threats, would collapse under scrutiny. But tread carefully, Robert warned. People like Margaret don't back down easily. She'll fight dirty. Armed with this knowledge, I felt a surge of confidence, but also a weight of responsibility. I didn't want to destroy the community, just hold Margaret accountable. That's when Tom, the security guard, showed up at my door, looking uneasy. Daniel, can I come in? There's something you need to know. I invited him in, pouring us both coffee. Tom shifted in his chair, his hands fidgeting. Margaret's been asking me to watch your place report who comes and goes, if you're following the rules. I told her I'd do it, but I don't like this. You've never caused trouble before those lights. I decided to trust Tom. I showed him the survey and explained the water rights. His jaw dropped. You're saying you could cut off the clubhouse's water? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Technically, yes, I said, tapping my fingers on the table. But I'd only use that as a last resort. Tom shook his head, a grin breaking through. Daniel, you've got more power than Margaret ever dreamed of. That clubhouse is her whole identity. Without it, she's nothing. That weekend, Margaret hosted a community appreciation dinner at the clubhouse, a lavish event I wasn't invited to, thanks to my ban. I decided to take a walk anyway, curious about the setup. As I passed the clubhouse, I noticed a small utility box at the edge of my property line the main water meter. I'd walked by it countless times without a second thought, but now I saw it for what it was, the physical link to my leverage. I was inspecting the meter when Margaret spotted me, storming out in a fury, her floral dress a riot of yellow and red. What are you doing? She demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. That's community property. I held up my phone, showing the survey. Margaret, this meter is on my land. I'm just making sure it's in good shape, being a good neighbor. Wouldn't want any issues during your dinner, right? Her face went pale, then flushed crimson as the implication sank in. For once, she was speechless, but her eyes burned with rage. You can't threaten our water supply, she sputtered. That's extortion. I'm not threatening anything, I said calmly, just pointing out my legal rights as the property owner. Margaret's threats escalated lawsuits, violations, the works, but I could see the panic behind her bluster. She stomped back to the clubhouse, leaving me standing by the meter, a quiet thrill in my chest. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived from Collins & Sons, a law firm run by Margaret's cousin. It demanded I sell my cabin back to the HOA at a fraction of its value or face a lawsuit for interfering with community operations. I sat in my cabin that night, the letter in one hand, a glass of bourbon in the other. Doubt crept in. Maybe I was in over my head. Margaret had connections, resources, and a knack for intimidation. Was I risking my home, my peace, over a string of lights? But then I remembered a lesson from my early days as an architect. When a client tries to bully you into cutting corners, stand firm, because integrity is worth more than a paycheck. Margaret had shown her true colors: petty, controlling, and willing to lie to maintain power. If I backed down, she'd target someone else next. I picked up the phone and called Robert. I'm not selling, I told him. Let's fight this. Robert laughed. That's the spirit. Let's call her bluff. He suggested requesting a special HOA meeting to present my case to the entire community, framing it as a discussion about infrastructure and governance. I sent an email to all 50 residents, carefully worded to avoid sounding confrontational. Pinewood Estates faces critical infrastructure issues that affect our property values, I wrote. Join me to discuss solutions that benefit us all. The week before the meeting was a blur of preparation. I compiled a presentation with the survey, utility records, and evidence of the clubhouse's violations. I practiced until I could recite it in my sleep, knowing Margaret would come armed with her narrative. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed far more than the usual half-dozen attendees. Word of the drama had spread, and residents were curious. Margaret sat at the head of the table, her dress a bruising mix of purple and orange, her hair a fortress of hairspray. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, setting up my laptop and projector. I'm here to talk about our community's infrastructure and how it impacts us all. Margaret tried to interrupt, her voice sharp. This is inappropriate. We're not here for conspiracy theories. But John raised a hand. Let him speak, Margaret. These are legitimate concerns. I walked through the room during the survey, explaining how my property controlled the water supply and how the clubhouse's operations violated county regulations. If the county investigates, I said, we could face fines or a shutdown. The room buzzed with murmurs. Residents started asking about liability, costs, and transparency. Margaret's composure cracked. This is all because I enforced our standards, she shouted, pointing at me. He's retaliating over those hideous lights. Then she made a fatal mistake. She proposed raising HOA fees from $300 to $500 a month to cover upgrades and legal challenges. The room erupted in protests. $2 for $100 a year was a hard pill to swallow. I seized the moment. There's a simpler solution, I said, clicking to a slide of the water lines. The clubhouse's water comes through my property. I'm willing to provide access for a fair fee. $8,000 a month, which would lower your HOA dues by $50 a month compared to Margaret's plan. The silence was deafening. Margaret's face cycled through shock, fury, and panic. "You can't hold us hostage," she screamed. "I'm calling the police." But Tom stood up, clearing his throat. "Margaret, there's something else." He played a recording Margaret's voice, admitting to using HOA funds for personal expenses and planning to sell the clubhouse to cover debts. The room gasped. Margaret fled in tears, and the board voted to suspend her, pending an audit. The air in the clubhouse was electric as Margaret Collins fled, her purple and orange dress a blur through the glass doors. The recording Tom played her voice confessing to embezzlement and scheming to sell the clubhouse hung over the room like a thundercloud. At 54, I'd seen my share of professional battles, but this felt different. This wasn't just about winning a client or securing a contract. It was about justice for a community that had been manipulated for too long. As I packed up my projector, residents approached me, their faces a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "You've opened our eyes, Daniel," said Ellen, a 67-year-old retiree who'd lived in Pinewood for a decade. "We had no idea. But I knew Margaret wasn't done. People like her don't slink away quietly." The week after her dramatic exit was surreal. Overnight, I went from the neighborhood outcast to a local hero. Neighbors who'd avoided me since the Christmas light fiasco now stopped by with homemade pies and casseroles, asking how they could help. Sarah, from the coffee shop, dubbed me the Amber Light Avenger, a nickname that made me chuckle every time she said it over her famous blueberry scones. Yet, beneath the newfound camaraderie, I braced for Margaret's counterattack. She was too entrenched, too proud, to let this go. Sure enough, Margaret regrouped. By Monday, she'd hired a public relations consultant. God knows how she afforded it, and sent a community-wide email titled "The Truth About Daniel Harper's Lies." It accused me of forging the land survey, fabricating the recording, and orchestrating a criminal conspiracy to seize control of Pinewood Estates. She called an emergency HOA meeting for Thursday, promising irrefutable evidence to clear her name. My stomach churned as I read the email. What if she'd found a loophole? What if her theatrics swayed the residents who were still on the fence? I spent the next few days fortifying my case with Robert, my lawyer friend. We double-checked the survey's authenticity with the county records office and secured a notarized copy. Tom provided a sworn statement about the recording, confirming he'd obtained it during a conversation with Margaret about HOA finances. Sarah rallied support, spreading the word about the meeting at her coffee shop. "People are fed up with her nonsense," she told me, her gray curls bouncing as she poured me a refill. "They're coming to hear you out, Daniel." Thursday evening, the clubhouse was packed not just with Pinewood residents, but with curious neighbors from nearby communities. Word of the drama had spread like wildfire, turning our quiet suburb into a spectacle. I walked in, my folder of documents under my arm, feeling the weight of every eye on me. Margaret stood at the front, a stark contrast to her usual floral flamboyance. She wore a navy blue suit, her hair tamed into a sleek bun, projecting an air of professionalism. For a moment, I wondered if she'd pulled off a comeback. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady, "I've called this meeting to expose the conspiracy against our community." She launched into a slick PowerPoint, detailing my pattern of disruption, photos of my cabin with the amber lights, emails I'd sent to residents, even a grainy shot of me by the water meter. She presented what she claimed was the real county survey, proving my documents were fake. For 10 minutes, she was convincing, her lawyer cousin nodding approvingly from the front row. Some residents shifted uncomfortably, glancing at me. Then she overplayed her hand. The real survey she projected had inconsistencies, different fonts, uneven margins, and, most glaringly, a date stamped 2 weeks in the future. As an architect, I'd spent years spotting flaws in blueprints, and this was a rookie mistake. I raised my hand. "Margaret, may I take a closer look at that document?" Her eyes flickered with hesitation, but with the room watching, She couldn't refuse. I walked to the projector, examined the screen, and smiled. This survey is dated for next month. Did you get it from a time traveler? The room erupted in laughter, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Margaret stammered, "That's a typo in the county system." But her composure was crumbling. I pulled out my phone and played Tom's recording again, Margaret's voice echoing. "We'll use the event fees to cover my credit card bills. The Clubhouse sale will clear everything." Gasps filled the room. Margaret tried to claim it was doctored, spinning a wild tale of a conspiracy involving me, Tom, and half the HOA board. That's when John Mitchell, the retired contractor, stood up. His voice was calm but commanding. "I've been investigating the HOA finances with an accountant friend. Over the past 2 years, $52,000 has been transferred from our accounts to personal accounts controlled by Margaret Collins. We have bank statements to prove it." He held up a stack of papers, and the room fell silent. Margaret's face drained of color, her bun unraveling as she clutched the podium. "You don't understand," she shrieked. "I was saving this community. Everything I did was for you, ungrateful people." Tom stepped forward, gently guiding her toward the door. "Ma'am, it's time to go. The board will handle this." As she left, I heard her mutter, "Those damn Christmas lights ruined everything." A line so absurd it almost broke the tension. The meeting shifted to practical matters. John was elected interim HOA president, and the residents voted to accept my utility proposal, $8,000 a month for water access, reducing HOA fees by $50 per household compared to Margaret's hike. As I left, residents shook my hand, their relief palpable. But I couldn't shake a pang of sadness. This hadn't needed to escalate so far. If Margaret had just talked to me about the lights like a reasonable person, none of this would have happened. The aftermath moved fast. By Friday, the community filed complaints with the county about Margaret's financial misconduct. By the end of the week, the district attorney's office opened a criminal investigation. The local paper ran a story headlined, "Christmas Lights Spark HOA Scandal," which I clipped and tucked into a drawer for posterity. But Margaret wasn't ready to surrender. She hired a new lawyer, not her cousin this time, but a friend of his who specialized in minor civil disputes, and announced plans to sue me, the HOA, Tom, and anyone else she could name. Her legal team even argued that my lights were a psychological warfare tactic to destabilize Pinewood, a claim so outlandish it made Robert laugh until he coughed. Meanwhile, I worked with John and the new board to formalize the utility agreement. The county inspector's report on the clubhouse was grim. Permit violations, a leaky roof, outdated wiring, and plumbing held together by what the inspector called optimistic duct tape. Repairs would cost $120,000, a sum the HOA couldn't cover without my water agreement. John laid it out at the next meeting. "Even if we scrape together the money, we need Daniel's cooperation. His proposal saves us from bankruptcy." The mood was surprisingly upbeat. Residents were relieved to finally understand the mess they'd been in, free from Margaret's secrecy. Then Margaret made her final play. She crashed the meeting with a hired security guard, a burly off-duty cop, who looked embarrassed to be there and demanded the floor. She'd prepared a binder of evidence, social media screenshots, more photos of my cabin, and a rambling manifesto claiming my lights were part of a plot to undermine traditional American values. Her hair, styled at home, was a chaotic mess, and her presentation was unhinged. Residents started chuckling, then leaving, as she ranted about plummeting property values and crime waves. When someone asked about the missing $52,000, Margaret snapped, launching into a tirade about her sacrifices and how I destroyed the American dream with my lights. The security guard gently suggested she wrap up, clearly uncomfortable. I felt a mix of pity and frustration. Margaret's downfall was her own doing, but her refusal to take responsibility was almost tragic. Margaret Collins' final outburst at the HOA meeting marked the end of her reign in Pinewood Estates, but the ripples of her actions lingered like a stubborn fog. As I stood in the clubhouse, watching her hired security guard usher her out amid her frantic protests, I felt no triumph, only a weary relief. At 54, I'd learned that victory in battles like this often came with a cost. The community was free of Margaret's grip, but the scars of her mismanagement and the divisions she'd sown needed healing. The amber Christmas lights that sparked this saga still hung on my porch, a quiet reminder of how a small act of defiance had unraveled a web of deceit. The days following the meeting were a whirlwind. The community's complaints to the county triggered a swift response. By midweek, the district attorney's office charged Margaret with embezzlement and fraud, citing the $52,000 she'd siphoned from HOA funds. The local newspaper, the Pinewood Post, ran a follow-up story. Amber Lights Shine Light on HOA Corruption. I couldn't help but smile at the headline, though the reality was less poetic. Margaret's legal troubles were mounting, and her desperate lawsuits against me, Tom, and the HOA were falling apart. Her lawyers claimed that my Christmas lights constituted psychological warfare, was laughed out of a preliminary hearing, with the judge calling it creative fiction. Meanwhile, the new HOA board, led by John Mitchell, moved quickly to stabilize Pinewood Estates. John, with his contractor's pragmatism, was the antithesis of Margaret's theatrical tyranny. At 62, he built a successful business by focusing on facts over drama, and he brought that clarity to the HOA. Our priority was the clubhouse, which the county inspector had deemed a liability nightmare. The $120,000 repair estimate loomed large, but my utility agreement $8,000 a month for water access provided a lifeline. The fees covered maintenance and a reserve fund, with the surplus reducing each resident's HOA dues by $50 a month, just as I'd promised. John called a community meeting to lay out the plan. The clubhouse was packed again, but the mood was different, hopeful, collaborative, a stark contrast to Margaret's reign of fear. Daniel's proposal is a game changer, John said, his gravelly voice steady. It saves us from bankruptcy and gives us a path forward. He outlined the repairs: a new roof, updated wiring, proper plumbing, and full compliance with county codes. Residents nodded, some even clapping. Sarah, from the coffee shop, caught my eye and winked, her gray curls bouncing as she mouthed, "Amber Light Avenger." But not everyone was on board. A small group of Margaret's loyalists, mostly older residents who'd bought into her community standards, rhetoric grumbled about the changes. At the meeting, a 70-year-old named Clara, who'd always worn Margaret's floral aesthetic like a badge, stood up. "This feels like a takeover," she said, her voice quavering. "Daniel's holding our water hostage." "How is that fair?" Murmurs rippled through the room, and I felt a familiar knot in my stomach. Conflict wasn't new to me. As an architect, I'd mediated disputes between clients and contractors. But this was personal. I stood, keeping my tone even. "Clara, I'm not holding anyone hostage. The clubhouse was operating illegally, draining our funds. My proposal ensures it stays open while lowering your fees. If there's a better solution, I'm all ears." John backed me up, showing the financials. Without the utility deal, HOA fees would skyrocket to cover repairs and fines. Clara sat down, unconvinced but quiet. I knew winning over everyone would take time, but the majority was with me. The repairs began the next month, funded by the utility fees, recovered stolen funds, and voluntary donations from residents eager to see the clubhouse restored. John oversaw the project himself, ensuring every nail and wire met code. I'd stopped by to check progress, marveling at the transformation. The sagging roof was replaced with sturdy shingles, the wiring modernized, and the plumbing no longer relied on optimistic duct tape. By spring, the clubhouse looked like something out of a magazine: sleek, functional, and dare I say beautiful. Sarah's coffee shop became the unofficial hub for community updates. Over scones and coffee, residents debated everything from clubhouse rules to landscaping plans. Sarah thrived in the new atmosphere, expanding her shop to include a cozy lounge area where people lingered to chat. "This is what Pinewood should have been all along," she told me one morning, her eyes bright. "You did that, Daniel." I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just wanted to hang my lights in peace, not spark a revolution." Tom, now promoted to head of community security, was another bright spot. His new role came with a raise and real authority, and he brought a calm professionalism that Margaret's regime lacked. "I always wondered why she was so obsessed with control," he told me over a beer one evening. Turns out, she was covering her tracks. His recording had been the turning point, and I owed him more than I could repay. I raised my glass. "To truth and Amber Lights." He laughed. "To not get fired." But Margaret's shadow lingered. She'd sold her Pinewood home to cover restitution and legal fees, moving in with a cousin in Wyoming. Yet, she kept firing off letters to the HOA, claiming she'd been framed and demanding reinstatement. Her lawsuits, though baseless, dragged on, costing the community legal fees. At one meeting, Clara and her allies suggested settling with Margaret to move on. The idea sparked heated debate. Ellen, the retiree who'd thanked me after the first meeting, was livid. Settle? She stole from us. We don't reward thieves. The room split, with younger residents and newcomers siding with Ellen, while Clara's group argued for peace at any cost. I stayed quiet, letting the community wrestle with the decision. John ultimately tabled the idea, citing the ongoing criminal case. Margaret's probation hearing was set for summer, and the DA was pushing for 2 years probation and full restitution of the $52,000. Her downfall was complete, but the debate over her punishment exposed a deeper divide. How do you balance justice with healing? It was a question I'd grapple with myself, lying awake at night, wondering if I'd pushed too hard. As the clubhouse neared completion, I focused on my corner of Pinewood. My cabin, once a pariah's hideout, was now a landmark, the Amber Lighthouse, as Sarah called it. I got permission from the new board to expand my holiday decorations, and I was already sketching plans for next Christmas. A dazzling display of colored lights, maybe even a synchronized music show. After all, I'd earned the right to celebrate. But the community's transformation was the real victory. Under John's leadership, the HOA streamlined its rules, scrapping Margaret's petty restrictions. Residents now had a voice, with open forums and committees for everything from landscaping to event planning. We started monthly potlucks, where neighbors shared stories and recipes, and volunteer crews spruced up common areas. Pinewood felt like a neighborhood for the first time since I'd moved in, free of the tension that had defined Margaret's era. Still, I couldn't shake a lingering unease. Margaret's loyalists, though fewer, continued to whisper about my power grab. At one potluck, Clara pulled me aside. You got what you wanted, Daniel. But don't think we've forgotten how this started. You stirred up trouble. Her words stung, not because they were true, but because they reminded me how fragile unity could be. I'd exposed corruption, but at the cost of making enemies. Was it worth it? I wasn't sure. The summer sun hung low over Pinewood Estates, painting the Rockies in hues of gold and crimson. I sat on my cabin's porch, the amber Christmas lights still dangling from last winter, now a symbol of something far greater than holiday cheer. At 54, I'd seen enough of life to know that battles, even the righteous ones, leave marks. But as I sipped my coffee, watching kids play in the newly renovated clubhouse across the way, I felt a quiet pride. Pinewood was no longer Margaret Collins' fiefdom. It was a community, flawed but thriving, and I'd played a part in that transformation. The clubhouse reopening was the talk of the summer. After months of repairs, funded by my $8,000 monthly utility fees, recovered stolen funds, and resident donations, the building was unrecognizable. The new roof gleamed, the wiring was safe, and the plumbing hummed reliably. John Mitchell, our interim HOA president, had overseen every detail with his contractor's eye, ensuring the project stayed on budget and met county standards. The grand opening was a community-wide celebration, complete with a ribbon cutting, live music, and Sarah's famous scones. I stood in the crowd, marveling at the modern space, open, airy, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the mountains. It was the kind of design I'd have pitched in my architect days. Residents mingled, their laughter a stark contrast to the tense HOA meetings of the past. Sarah's coffee shop had set up a pop-up stand, and she handed me a latte with a grin. Look at this place, Amber Light Avenger. You made this happen. I shook my head, deflecting. John and the community did the heavy lifting. I just hung some lights. But her words stayed with me. The utility agreement had saved Pinewood from financial ruin, and the $50 monthly savings on HOA fees were a tangible win for every resident. It wasn't just about money, it was about trust, something Margaret had eroded for years. Margaret's legal saga reached its conclusion that summer. She pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud, receiving 2 years probation and in order to repay the $52,000 she'd stolen. To cover restitution and her mounting legal fees, she'd sold her Pinewood home, a sprawling modern affair that had once been her stage for HOA dominance. Rumor had it she was living with a cousin in Wyoming, a far cry from her floral-dressed ring. Her lawsuits against me and the HOA were dismissed, her psychological warfare, argument mocked in court filings. The Pinewood Post ran a final piece. HOA scandal closes with guilty plea. And with that, Margaret faded from our lives. But her absence didn't erase the divisions she'd left behind. Clara and her small group of loyalists remained a thorn in the community's side, questioning every decision and casting me as the villain who'd upended tradition. At one HOA meeting, Clara proposed reinstating some of Margaret's old rules, like strict color palettes for holiday decorations. "We need standards," she insisted, her voice sharp. "Without them, we'll lose what makes Pinewood special." The room tensed, and I felt the old urge to tap my fingers nervously. But Ellen, the retiree who'd become one of my staunchest allies, shot back. "Standards? You mean Margaret's excuses to control us? We're better than that now." The proposal was voted down, but Clara's glare lingered. John's leadership was the antidote to those tensions. He streamlined the HOA's operations, creating transparent budgets and open forums where residents could voice concerns. The arbitrary rules bans on certain flowers, mailbox designs, or, yes, Christmas light colors were scrapped. In their place, we had guidelines focused on safety and property values, with input from everyone. Monthly potlucks became a tradition, held in the clubhouse or common areas, where neighbors swapped stories over lasagna and pie. Volunteer crews maintained trails and gardens, and kids organized movie nights in the clubhouse. Pinewood felt alive, like the community I'd hoped for when I bought my cabin. Tom, now head of security, was a key part of that shift. His calm presence reassured residents, and he implemented practical measures like better lighting at the community gate and regular patrols. Margaret used security to intimidate, he told me one day, leaning against his patrol car. "I'm here to make people feel safe." His promotion had been a bright spot, and I was glad to see him thrive. Sarah's coffee shop, meanwhile, had become Pinewood's heart. Her new lounge area was always buzzing, a place where residents debated everything from snow removal to holiday events. She'd even started hosting open mic nights, where I'd occasionally read poetry from my college days, to much applause and good-natured ribbing. My cabin, once the epicenter of controversy, was now a local landmark. Neighbors called it the Amber Lighthouse, and kids would point it out on walks, giggling about the Christmas light rebellion. With John's blessing, I began planning my next holiday display, a spectacle of colored lights, animated figures, and maybe a music-synchronized show. I spent evenings sketching designs, blending my architect's precision with a newfound playfulness. After all, what was the point of winning if you couldn't have a little fun? The financial impact of the utility agreement was exactly as I'd promised. The $8,000 monthly fee covered the clubhouse's water and maintenance, with the surplus distributed as credits on HOA statements. Every resident saved money compared to Margaret's proposed $200 fee hike, and the transparency of the process built trust. Pinewood's property values, which Clara had warned would plummet, actually rose, thanks to the clubhouse's revival and the community's renewed appeal. Real estate agents even started mentioning the Amber Light story in listings, turning our saga into a quirky selling point. Beyond Pinewood, the story took on a life of its own. I began getting calls from residents in other HOA communities, asking for advice on dealing with overzealous boards. My standard response was simple: document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to ask questions. My architecture business saw an unexpected boost, too. Clients started seeking me out not just for designs, but for help navigating property disputes, a niche I hadn't anticipated. Who'd have thought a string of Christmas lights would reshape my career? As winter approached, I sat on my porch, the amber lights glowing against the first snow. The clubhouse was lit up across the way, hosting a community craft fair. Families laughed, kids ran through the snow, and neighbors waved as they passed. This was the Pinewood Margaret had claimed to champion but never achieved. Her obsession with control, her theft, her refusal to listen had all been her undoing. In her place, we'd built something real, something human. Reflecting on the journey, I realized it wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about standing up when it mattered, even when the odds felt impossible. I hadn't set out to be a hero, just a guy who wanted to hang his lights in peace. But life has a way of pulling you into bigger fights, and I was proud I'd chosen to fight this one. The sadness I'd felt at the height of the conflict over the ugliness, the division had faded, replaced by a quiet certainty that we'd done the right thing. Pinewood Estates wasn't perfect. Clara and her allies still grumbled, and new challenges would air as no plowing disputes, budget debates, the usual community friction. But we had a foundation now, built on transparency and respect. As I planned my Christmas display, I couldn't help but smile. Maybe I'd add some neon lights this year, just to keep things lively. To those reading this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you faced bullying or injustice in your community, whether from an HOA, a neighbor, or someone in power? How did you respond? Did you fight back, seek compromise, or find another way? The issues of power abuse and standing up for what's right are universal, and I'm curious about your perspectives. Share your experiences, and let's spark a conversation about building better communities, one light at a time.